Hi everyone, welcome to the lecture on social cognition. So today we'll be talking about how we think and behave with and around people. So the lecture goals really is for us to talk about what is social cognition, and then we'll talk about how we use information to make predictions about our social world around us, and then we'll finish with how we seek out information and how we process this information and how that affects our behavior and our multiple behaviors. So as we've talked about before, we construe our information, our environment. We make judgments. We come to conclusions about what we see. We are not robots, and we are social beings that move through the social environment, and therefore the information needs to be interpreted because not everything is as it seems, and so this gives way to misinterpretations. You probably have many experiences in your life where you misinterpreted, or you assumed, or you just kind of like didn't get the information or the message that was sent to you, whether that was nonverbal communication or you misinterpreted actually something that was told to you. However, there's human nature involves misinterpretations, and that's kind of in part by our social cognition. Our social cognition is a process by which we kind of, process this information and kind of try to deal with the information around us and try to behave as best as we can. So social cognition is the study of the many ways that we make social judgments or that we interpret our social world. To be a little bit more technical, I guess, social cognition is the study of how people think about the social world and how they arrive to judgments that help them interpret the past, understand the present, and predict the future. And so I guess what's important to kind of remember, like, why do we care about this? And the main reason is because these social judgments, the judgments that we come to, the conclusions that we come to with their interpretation, actually influence our behaviors. And so, without this kind of this filter of social judgment or social cognition, we wouldn't come to behave necessarily, because we wouldn't necessarily know how to behave because we have to interpret it. So basically, our social judgments influence our behaviors, and that's why, as social psychologists, we are interested in what's going on in this little black box of ours, which is our mind and our social cognition. So one of the reasons why our social judgments are inaccurate often, or most of the time, it's because we are prone to many types of errors. So I've repeated this many times. We're not robots, and we're not zeros and ones, and we are imperfect, which is the beauty of human nature, but also is kind of like our I guess our weak point of sorts. Now, these types of errors and these biases are what we kind of have to watch out for. And so mistakes in our social judgments can produce these kind of important consequences that can either be obviously totally harmless or quite severe. And so I guess one point to remember is that it's not necessarily the gravity of one judgment or the gravity of one episode, but we have to also consider the repeated episodes of minor judgments. So, for example, repeated episodes of stereotyping, or repeated episodes of racism, repeated episodes of discrimination. These very small, relatively harmless acts can actually add on and build into a significant kind of like dire situations. So, for example, always picking the taller person in your team because you just prefer taller people. Well, you may be missing out on really skilled shorter people. Just like always choosing John instead of Mohammed. Well, Mohammed might be definitely the most competent and most a genius, and because you're choosing John, which you all have been kind of in group and kind of discrimination, you may be missing out. So these small kind of acts of relatively harmless errors or biases, that's where they can become significant problems through repetition and through kind of being applied constantly. So we only have access to the information that is available to us. We don't have access to all of the information. And so we have to kind of do the best we can with the information that we have. So we have to fill in the gaps, either with the information that we don't have or with other kind of information to kind of, move on to behave or move on with our life. So we have to, use cognitive shortcuts. We have to make stuff up. We have to rationalize our behavior or rationalize a thought. We have to convince ourselves. We have to assume things. We have to rely on past similar events to try to predict, future events. And then there's many, many, many more of ways in which we fill the gaps, these cognitive gaps. And so sometimes we have very little information, but make judgments anyways, because that's life. I mean, you can't just stop and say, okay, well, I don't have all the information, therefore I have to gather all the information before I choose which kind of coffee I want to take. And maybe you have friends that, read the entire list of the menu when they go somewhere, and they're like, just choose already. You just need a coffee. You just want a drink. Just choose any drink. Any drink will be fine. Some people, they scour for all of the information. Some people maybe, just say, yeah, whatever is fine. Anyways, we can't always be reading every single line on the menu all the time. Otherwise, we just couldn't live that way. So we make these snap judgments. And these snap judgments are ways for us to kind of, live through things and live through events and maintain friendships. So here's a quick example. I'm going to switch over here. Here's a quick example. I want you to, I'm going to show you pictures. You'll see pictures appear on the screen. And I want you to quickly evaluate who you think is the most competent person. So here you go. So there'll be two pictures, one on the right, one on the left. Have a quick look. And I want you to evaluate who you think is the most competent person. All right. That's pretty quick, right? So it turns out that these people, these researchers, actually, I forget who. I should have I don't have the reference to it, but I should put the reference. It turns out that these are actual candidates for an election, a U.S. election, and your snap judgment. Let's say you said that the person on the left, so the gentleman on the left, I guess they both have kind of relatively short hair. They both have ties. The gentleman on the left of the screen, that's a little bit more square on. If you judged him to be more competent, that actually represented what the election results were. Now, how did you come to the discussion, to that evaluation? You made a snap judgment. You just kind of looked at both pictures and you thought that, this person looked more competent. Well, it so happens that this type of snap judgment, in these cases, where you have no idea what the platform of that person versus the other person is, it so happened that these snap judgments by complete naive people were better than chance at predicting the outcome of the actual elections. So that says there's a few things. First of all, when we actually vote for someone, how are we voting? Like, are we actually voting for our just implicit kind of snap judgments of we think that this person is more competent, regardless of, and we kind of forget about all the other things, or we vote for this person and then we justify that we voted for this person because we like their platform or so on and so forth. So it's kind of a little scary because this shows that snap judgments actually kind of influence or at least predict, judgment that should be quite rational and quite kind of, kind of controlled, or, you thought about who and why you want to vote for this person. What's also interesting is if you ask people to judge the trustworthiness or the likability of the people, it doesn't work. So it's the snap judgment of competence, which is relatively kind of, important in terms of I feel like this person is competent as a political leader. That is the snap judgment that kind of works in predicting the outcomes of these elections. So as you see down the line here, down the line here, that is well above chance, and there's a significant difference between chance and not chance. So that's the snap judgment. What is the accuracy of these snap judgments? Well, they're not always accurate in terms of we make snap judgments with the limited information that we have, and oftentimes these snap judgments are likely wrong, or more often than other, they're likely wrong. And so what do we do with this? Well, first of all, recognizing that we do snap judgments and kind of, having the insight in that, I've come to that judgment, or I've come to that decision, or I've come to that impression because of the snap judgment. That's one way of kind of like limiting the influence of our snap judgments in our behaviors. Because if we realize that we've made a snap judgment with the snap judgment, which is quite difficult in and of itself, we can at least kind of reinterpret and kind of reevaluate some of the things that are going on in our head. But it's almost inevitable to make these snap judgments. Examples of wherein snap judgments are actually kind of quite accurate and actually quite efficient is, I don't know if you've ever heard of Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell came out with a book a few years ago called Blink. And he called it the power of thinking without thinking. So basically, the whole book is about snap judgments or thin slicing or heuristics. We'll get through a few of these things later on. And he talks about this example of this art expert where he was emotionally and physically repulsed by certain statues. Because he was like, that's disgusting. I can't take it. And it turns out that the statues that he was repulsed by were fakes. And so he was so expert in specific types of artists, I think it was Rodin, that he knew everything about Rodin. And when he saw like a fake Rodin, he said he was physically repulsed. He also talks about, Malcolm also talks about this tennis coach that could predict with like something like a 90% accuracy when a server would double fault. And so he's seen so many people kind of, fault on their double services or fault on their doubles. Yeah, default on their, I forget what the term is. That he, in a split second, he can identify when and how a tennis player will double fault. And it's not because he's got this magic kind of gift. He's accrued experience in identifying body behavior or body position, balance, and all of these kind of complicated kind of psychomechanical kind of ways of identifying, well, that is the improper kind of technique or / way of that is likely going to lead to a, to a service bluff or a missed service. And so in certain cases, when we're very knowledgeable and we have a lot of experience, snap judgments actually become, it's not a snap judgment, it's an automated decision-making process that stems from a lot of experience. So it's a type of snap judgments, but slightly different in terms of it's an over-practice snap judgment that stems from deliberate practice. Some people think, this is not necessarily an accurate way of identifying snap judgment, but some research has also seen that we can predict the socioeconomic status of someone, a new stranger, after about 7 words, after 7 spoken words. So is that discrimination? Is that stereotyping? Is that kind of like portraying identity? It's a combination of these things where we've learned that these types of people, and we've categorized these types of this information in ways that kind of predict, mostly right in this context, their participants or someone else's socioeconomic status. So one of the reasons why snap judgments or social cognition is kind of like misleading, or we misinterpret information, is because we process the information with this first-hand information type of bias. So first-hand information is personal experience or personal observation of the information, and so personal experiences may be unrepresentative of all of the experiences. So because we see the world through our experiences, we assume that the rest of the world experiences the world like us. And so our personal experiences are very likely unrepresentative of everyone's experiences, or the diversity of experiences. And so we think that others experience similar experiences to us, and therefore our experience represents everyone's experience. And that's because we can't always put ourselves in other people's shoes or other people's heads. So making these judgments about a country, having only talked to a few people or seen a few places, it doesn't represent the entire country. It doesn't represent the entire, people and so on. But we base our impression of the country based on our personal firsthand experiences. And so we overemphasize our experience as data or as information, and we prioritize that information over other information because, we don't have all that information. So we're kind of, again, sort of limited. Which brings us to the idea of self-fulfilling prophecy, which you very likely seen or heard about in other courses. And this is the tendency of people acting in ways that bring about the very thing that they expect to happen. And so to be added to that is you need a mechanism, you need a behavior, you need an action to start the domino effect. So you just can't think it and then it'll become. You have to think it and then do something about it for it to actually kind of happen. So for example, if you think of a stranger as boring, if you expect this person that a stranger to be boring, and you will not talk to this person. So the act of not talking is kind of like an action, or kind of like a behavior of not talking, and therefore you'll think of course, you see, I didn't talk to this person, she's not talking to me, therefore I was right. Obviously this person is boring because they got nothing to say and they're not engaging. Or if you believe that you'll have a good grade, you may spend more time studying, and therefore by spending more time you actually understand the material better, and you get better grades at the exam. And so we perceive and reinterpret information, like we've said I don't know how many times. Therefore, the ways in which the information is presented, or the way in which we consume this information, actually kind of makes a difference. And so this is what we call these framing effects. And so marketing people, media, everyone that wants to persuade you or influence you or kind of convince you of thinking in ways, they all think about how they will present this information to you to kind of either prioritize the information or kind of set up the things so that you interpret the information the way that they want you to interpret the information. So knowing how information is actually presented and the effects that this has is quite important for anyone in marketing, anyone in HR, human resources, actually anyone working with humans. It's actually quite important. So these framing effects are basically refers to the influence that the influence on judgments resulting from the way information is presented. So basically, the way that you frame the information, the way that you present the information, will influence people's judgments. That's what we call framing effects. Now, there are different types of framing effects, and one of which is probably the most common or the more popular one are order effects. So literally, the order in which you present the information will have an influence on people's judgments. So the primacy effect is when you prioritize and you disproportionately influence the judgment of the person by presenting the body of evidence first. So you start with a big story, a big important kind of fact, and then you follow up with kind of menial things that are kind of somewhat irrelevant. The person will remember the most important thing because it was the first thing that you presented. And there's also the recency effect, which is the opposite, where you will present the most important information at the very last. Because let's say you have a very long list of things that you want to get through, and the most important thing that you want the person to remember is you put that thing at the last, because we can't remember everything that everyone told us, and so we'll keep the most important thing the last, because that's the most recent thing that we'll have told them, and the most recent thing that's been in their working memory. Another type of framing effect is called spin framing. And so this is where we basically spin the information into either a favorable kind of spin or unfavorable spin. And so marketing is all based on this. You spin things. If you want to convince your friend to come one evening, you say, well, it won't be that bad. You limit the unfavorableness, or you say, oh my gosh, it'll be so amazing. You've never experienced this. So you kind of increase the favorability. One example that I kind of find funny, or not, whatever, is so oats. Oats are naturally gluten-free, and obviously they've always been gluten-free, and natural oats, organic oats, or whatever oats you have in the world, they're naturally gluten-free. But all of a sudden, with this kind of like this health craze, everyone kind of started worrying about gluten and kind of like, where is gluten and who has gluten, blah, 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 blah. And so this is an example of Bob's Red Mill rolled oats, where they clearly have on their packaging, gluten-free, to indicate that, we're special oats, we have gluten-free oats. And this is purely for marketing purposes to indicate, if you're celiac or if you don't want to eat gluten, choose our product. However, it's always been like that. So they're just spinning the product to kind of speak to particular people or people who are looking for something. Another very popular kind of framing effects are positive and negative framing. So in general, negative information draws more attention than positive information. You see this in the news constantly. You will pay more attention to negative news, catastrophes, victims, all this stuff. All of our police shows and all of their detective shows are about murders and whatever. A lot of them actually are about that. So negative information just draws attention. It kind of, it draws our attention. Why? Because, we probably more interested in it. And generally in our life, we're more attuned to threats than we are to kind of good and kind of cuddly kind of, teddy bears. And so information that's framed in a negative way will also elicit stronger responses. They'll stronger emotional responses and stronger kind of, responses in general. Versus positive information, which will be kind of like, less strong, and we'll retain our information or our attention for not as long, and so on. And so, if we talk, for example, during COVID, the COVID death rates were always focused on the death rates. So, for example, if we talked about a 2% death rate, that obviously was very different than saying we have a 98% survival rate. And so during COVID, for example, we are focused on the gravity of COVID and the gravity of being sick or being contagious and so on. And so public health officials were like, no, we want people to be aware of the negative effects of COVID, and therefore we're going to grab their attention to maintain their attention and the responses and behaviors by telling them what the death rate is. Had we talked about survival rate, 98, I mean, that's basically practically everyone, it's like 98 people out of 100. That's basically everyone. And so like, what's the big deal? I mean, almost everyone, 2% die from all sorts of things. So what's the point? So you see how this very, very kind of very, very subtle tweak in changing the numbers makes a huge difference in how we interpret and the attention that we give to this type of framing. Another type of example is this greenwashing, especially now with this ecological kind of bent and climate change and everyone kind of being eco-sensitive and eco-conscious. Businesses that are not eco-conscious will just use green logos. They'll just put a leaf on their product, even though they haven't changed anything. And that's a way of, limiting that's one way of positively giving a positive message, even though the underlying message or their underlying kind of company might be a little bit dirty. They kind of green it. They make it green by kind of increasing the positivity. So that's one way of using positive framing to kind of limit the negative aspects of one's company or one's kind of commercial enterprise.